Alastair Newton is Senior Political Analyst at Nomura International. He's responsible for analysing political risk and the implications for global financial markets. Well, we've got talk now of a bridging loan, Alastair. I've got to say, you know, we were talking, I think, 2 or 3 months ago.
Early October.
And I must say that we could talk about the same things, couldn't we?
Groundhog Day in Hong Kong. Here we are talking about Greece again. It's the same issues, it's the same challenges. The Greeks, frankly, even if we get this package through, we're probably going to be having the same discussion again when I'm back here next September. And there's no guarantee we're going to get this package through. Very finely balanced indeed, in my view. Eurozone finance ministers will hopefully meet on Monday. Could go either way. I'd say maybe 51% probability they sign off on it.
Let's say that they don't sign off on it, and they say, OK, we'll give a bridging loan until we see more, well,
they might go further than that.
Well,
they might just say enough is enough.
In which case, they're out.
In which case, they're going to default.
Which means they're out.
Well, it doesn't. There is no automaticity about that. I think in many respects, the slightly more scary scenario for markets is that Greece defaults and doesn't leave the Eurozone.
Yeah. That's when you get the proper contagion.
That's when you probably get the contagion.
Now, is default really all about, when we look at it, about those credit default swaps kicking in essence, and that meaning that the whole crisis becomes systemic? Because you can isolate it if you just have what they're calling an orderly default, which means that the CDSs don't kick in.
The whole crisis could become systemic. Now, I think there's 2 ways of looking at this, Rich. We're seeing a lot in the press at the moment about North European, Finland, Netherlands, Germany in particular, putting the pressure on Greece, perhaps not worrying if Greece does leave. Germany's view is not that straightforward. What we've been hearing recently has come from Finance Minister Schäuble, and he and his team in the German Finance Ministry have come down more towards the view of the Finns and the Dutch. Remember, last week we had Nelly Kroes, we had Premier Rutte, both come out and say the Greeks could leave the Eurozone, we can manage it, we have a firewall now which will do that. Angela Merkel, I believe, takes a very different view.
Yeah,
now, Merkel is very analytical. She's a scientist, and what she's looking at is risks which she can't quantify. And Merkel is the person who will decide where Germany finally comes down.
And where Greece goes.
And I will bet you that if this goes to the German Parliament on the 27th of February, when it's due to go to the German Parliament, ratification of this bailout package, that Merkel will have the votes there in Germany. The real risk, to my mind, is actually the Netherlands, where not only is the minority government getting squeezed from the right by the PVV Eurosceptic, but we now have a situation where a government which has been able to depend on support from left-of-centre opposition parties to push through bailout packets has the left-wing socialists rising in Dutch opinion polls and basically saying no more bailouts. So watch the Dutch very carefully as this moves forward, because they could be the one who does finally break ranks and say the Greeks are not going to deliver, the Greeks can't deliver, and they're probably right about that. Frankly, 120% debt to GDP ratio is not sustainable in the case of Greece.
We were just talking before the break about 120% of national, GDP being unsustainable, but that's in 2020 for Greece. That's if all the measures that they promise are taken and actually done 100%.
And if they work.
And indeed if they work as well. Now,
it's not going to happen.
Right, so what's the point in all this exercise? What's the point of this exercise?
Well, that 120, I think the reason that they've chosen 120 and refused to admit that it's not sustainable, which it isn't in the case of Greece. Greece needs a further debt write-down, there's no question about that. Guess what Italy's debt to GDP ratio is? There's this idea in Europe's political classes, which is wrong, frankly, that if markets get the idea that 120% is not sustainable in the case of Greece, they'll assume the same in the case of Italy. Clearly, Italy is a very, very different case indeed. And frankly, the Europeans would do well to get away from this, accept that Greece needs a further debt write-down or it's going to default, and in the process allow the CDSs to trigger. Because if the CDSs don't trigger, all the good work which the ECB has done in the last 3 months, getting the yield on the Italian and Spanish debt down, 10-year in particular, was above 7, now down at 5 thanks to a combination of LTRO and ECB intervention, that's all going to be blown away. And if we see those interest rates on Spanish and Italian debt go up again, then markets are going to worry a lot.
Alastair, we were talking before, we'll talk about China, I think, in the all-in in a minute, well, in about 15 minutes from now, but interesting point, because we didn't really touch on it in great detail, is about these credit default swaps, and if they are triggered, that they could be systemic, but what happens if they're not triggered?
Well, as I say, if they're not triggered, you are going to see markets concluding that CDSs in Europe are not worth the paper they are printed on, and you are going to see the spreads begin to blow out again across the periphery, but perhaps not only in the periphery. France. Markets are going to get very nervous about France in a couple of weeks anyway, because they're going to be looking at the prospect of a President Hollande. Not a certainty. Sarkozy could yet pull off a big surprise there. But Hollande's pre-election rhetoric about the Eurozone, about the French economy, about banking regulation is going to unsettle markets. Chances of a downgrade if Hollande is elected in France? Non-negligible in my view, given that he wants to reverse the Sarkozy pension reforms. So a lot of reasons to be concerned.
Did you hear what John Dawson said this morning about what's going on between Greece and Germany right now?
I did.
Bit of anger. Just the real architecture of the euro to create peace. This harmonious 17-nation thing is becoming a now, obviously, as expected. The Wolfgang Schäuble, the Greek German finance minister, talking about how Greece and his deputy saying it's a bottomless pit, and then the Greek president saying, we fought for freedom, we fought against the Nazis, and so on and so forth. It just
He actually used the Nazi word, though, did he?
No, he didn't. He wasn't the resistance.
But, whoa. I was doing some math here, and is he actually old enough to have fought in World War II?
He was 10. He could be in the resistance.
Child soldier.
He was in the resistance.
Well, what do you make of this? I mean, I think what John was alluding to was, of course, the European Coal and Steel Union being set up to stop wars from happening again. But some of these, the wheels are coming off it slowly.
I don't think the wheels are coming off it. Let's not get too excited about this. There's a lot of rhetoric flying around, and there is a lot of bad feeling. There's no doubt about it. And there is a clear culture gap, if you like, between Northern Europe and Southern Europe, and that's actually very difficult to bridge. Now, I've been writing for over a year about resistance to bailouts in Northern Europe, and what we are seeing is growing popular resistance to bailouts. And as I was saying to Rish earlier, watch the Netherlands most closely. Keep in mind this is a country which voted against the European Constitution in a plebiscite in 2005. The Germans will do whatever they have to do to try and keep the Eurozone together. And it is, as I said to Rish earlier, Angela Merkel who will call the shots in the end, and not Wolfgang Schäuble, with all due respect to him. Merkel remains the most powerful politician in Europe. Whether she can keep the Finns and the Dutch on board, though, is going to be the tricky bit. In the south, of course, the Greeks are getting very resentful. Frankly, as I said when I was on the programme in October, and it's worth saying again, the Greeks simply do not get it. They have no choice. They have to do austerity. They either do it inside the Eurozone with actually what amounts to help from Germany and the IMF, or they do it outside by themselves.
Cut, though, right? There's really no else to kind of get...
But they've done nothing yet. They've done no structural reform. Yeah. They've done nobody has been fired from the public sector since the start of this crisis. They've been put into job banks.
That's the point of Juncker is to say, when are you going to implement it? When he's saying mechanism to implement it. That's what the sticking point is.
And some Greek officials want it to be after their election, which hasn't even been scheduled yet.
Well, it will take place in April.
Wasn't Papandreou essentially fired? I mean, wasn't he someone that had to step back?
Papandreou is still party leader of PASOK. He's still a member of Parliament.
He's not the Prime Minister.
Still got a job. Has 8% support now in the polls.
Because actually in that comment from the Greek president, talking about, who is Wolfgang Schäuble to insult and ridicule Greece, then he said, and he mentioned the Finns and the Dutch.
Yeah.
Why are they such a concern?
Well, the Dutch, because there's a lot of Euroscepticism in the Netherlands, and there has been for quite a long time, as that 2005 referendum demonstrates. The Finns, you look at this from the perspective of the Finns. Get on a plane, fly to Finland, find a random Finn and say, should Finland be bailing out the southern Europeans? And the answer you will get is, who came to help us during the Scandinavian banking crisis in the 1990s?
Meanwhile, it looks like China is going to step in and become the white knight, right? They've reduced their holdings of U.S. treasuries for the first time since 2010.
Let's be a bit cautious about this. Okay? Now, what China really wants to do, and they've been very clear about this, and we've been talking about this for a long time at Nomura, they want to buy cheap European assets. They want to use their sovereign wealth funds to get into European equity, and they don't want those barriers which were there before the financial crisis started. Remember, sovereign wealth funds were a huge issue in 2007, 2008.
Is this commercial
they don't want those coming
motivation,
back.
Or is it more political?
It's commercial and political. It's political in the sense that one of the things China wants to acquire in Europe is technology companies. And one of the bars to that is the arms embargo, because, of course, a lot of that technology is dual use. Yep. Now, as far as sovereign debt is concerned, the question you've got to ask yourself is who really needs help at the moment? And the answer is the word that nobody speaks today, Portugal.
Oh, come on, I mean, really, we just know it's going to be after Greece, don't we?
We do, but nobody's saying it. None of Europe's leaders are saying it. But
So is this a snub to the U.S. then, by reducing? This is not, this is because the U.S. realizes this money's going to go towards Europe?
There's a very good piece on the FT this week, Wolfgang Munchar said, in fact, you see that, let Portugal and Greece default, and use the money so they can rebuild their countries and ring-fence the rest.
Wolfgang has been quite outspoken over the crisis for some time. And a lot of the things he says are sensible in economic terms, but they're not necessarily going to happen in political terms. Portugal needs a debt write-down. There is no question about that. And if you go back to Davos, World Economic Forum, the number of leaders who said Europe needs a bigger firewall to protect Spain and Italy. Portugal is already implicitly outside the firewall. So Europe's leaders have accepted that's going to happen. The question is when. I don't see China coming in and buying Portuguese debt to get back to the role that China's going to play. I can see China coming in and buying Italian and Spanish debt.
And assets. I mean, don't forget that as well.
Assets. But let's also keep in mind, where we're busy focusing on China, we're busy focusing on Greece, that the thing which markets are going to be focused on is going to be LTRO2 on the 29th of February.
A lot of people say that. That's interesting, another round of the LTRO.
Well, you know, we all got it wrong on LTRO1. It turned out to be bigger and more important than anybody had anticipated. Now, I don't think it's a game changer, but it has done two things. First of all, it's been instrumental in boosting sentiment in Europe, and secondly, it's bought time for the politicians. LTRO2 will be a bigger take-up than we had anticipated, at least initially. We're going to see banks which didn't get into LTRO1 coming in.
So that's all we've got time for, but great of you to join us. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.